Yo, what's up everybody? I'm going to show you today how I created this digital flower at the Beeple Digital Art DeathMatch, all live on stage. And I created this, I think in like 20 minutes or something like that. I'm going to be able to do it all with just Octane and an HDRI, no other additional kind of assets to use here. So I'm going to go into my front perspective view. You can see here, I got the Sublime pen tool, and I'm going to just start to create kind of an overall, maybe like floral path shape. And just by clicking, holding, dragging some points around, maybe start, by creating an initial curve here, have that curve kind of come up a little higher and maybe bring it down. And you can see I'm kind of doing some kind of like, I don't know, digital tulip type shape here. Maybe something like that. Maybe, I don't know. This is where you kind of like play around with it a little bit, manipulate it. This is kind of something similar to what I did, at the Digital Art Deathmatch. Now you really don't have a ton of time to come in here and keep like tweaking individual points. It's like, once you kind of first get your initial general shape here, like that's the shape that you have to go with. There's not a ton of time here. Okay, cool. So let's say I'm happy with this initial shape. Once you get that where you're kind of happy with, all we're going to do is we're going to throw this into a cloner object. But before we do that, we want to make sure that our anchor point is moved down to this kind of center point. It'll just make everything a little bit easier. So we'll enable the axis tool, and I'll just move this down roughly to that kind of point and disable enable axis, throw it into the cloner, change the cloner to radial, right? You can already see this kind of digital kind of flower shape taking form. Now on the Sublime path itself, we can right click that, go to C4D Octane tags, and we're going to add the Octane object tag because we're going to convert this into hair. So we may as well get our render going. And again, the only asset you'll need to kind of create this outside of Octane, of course, is going to be an HDRI. I did use that just to help light. I actually think we could probably just use some area lights as well, but knowing that I only had 20 minutes or less to have the whole thing from start to beginning, or from start to end, beginning to end here to finish it, I knew that I just had to hop in and create. I had the HDRI assets ready to go. So I will put a texture environment and make the texture environment black. And I'm going to just change this to visible environment. And then we'll throw in our HDRI environment in here as well. And I am going to use the HDRI Link Plus here. Now, I didn't have this during the demo, but again, that's just going to let me easily access some HDRIs there. And I'm just going to change it down to a preview size. Let's come in here. I'll set up some basic path tracing, kernel. Love it. All right. And let's get a material. And for this, all I did was I created a specular material. I added the spec material to the Sublime. And in here, into the comment, I did check and enable fake shadows. And we can go back in here in a moment and see if there's anything additional that we want to change in the index and fun stuff like that. Now, in the actual Sublime itself, let's begin to kind of maybe increase the thickness of the path so that way we can make sure we're in fact seeing it. And you'll want to make sure that in here we do turn on render as hair so we can see it. And we'll make a camera. Now for this, I additionally made a camera that had a pretty long focal length here. I don't remember the exact focal length, but maybe something like 120. You're going to see that we're probably going to have to zoom out a little bit now as well. Excellent. Just kind of lined it up like that. I threw a cylinder in here for kind of the overall stem. And we could just move this down because I know it's kind of going to go off screen. And I did put this same clear material on that as well. Again, to get real nice contrast in here, finding an HDRI that fits really well is going to be important. But again, I didn't really have that many options during the Digital Art Deathmatch here. Okay, so yeah, let's maybe bring this down to like We'll maybe bring this down to like 0.5 to get that real thin kind of look. I did really heavily lean on depth of field in this one. So let's increase the aperture. And we'll just focus on one of these individual points. I'll keep going here. Let's see how high we have to bring up the aperture to really make it so we're focused just on this aspect. Wow, that's crazy. I don't think I've ever gone up to 200 on the aperture. Let's just keep going. All right, let's stick with that for the moment. Maybe even zoom in slightly a little bit more. There we go. You can see now refocus on our object. And with a cloner object, the count, right? That's going to be entirely up to you how much we kind of add or take away from that. Let's add about 80. And then I did throw a random effector onto that cloner object. So I did a handful of these, and this just kind of gives a little bit more variety. I didn't really do a ton in position, so let's bring these back down. And I did add some in the rotations of these pieces, and same thing with the scale. I didn't do uniform scale though. You can see that's probably too extreme. Let's see, 0.05. Yeah, I was just trying to give, you know, a lot extra variety to this here in general. And we can see already that it's beginning to create kind of a pretty interesting shape. And let's just try to focus back in on that front hair. Wonderful. And then I actually copied this same cloner. And so I'll call this like main flower, and we'll call this inside flower. And for this one, I did begin to transform this in the Y direction. So I made it a bit taller. I don't remember what I did. Remember, I was working pretty fast during this one, and I did reduce the inside a little bit as well. So let's try like 1.5 for the inside here. Maybe even go a bit thinner on it. So like 0.25 and 4, reduce that. And then I threw another random effector on this one as well. Let's see. There we go. There's our random. And for this one, again, I didn't really push the position too much, but let's see what happens if we do rotation here. We begin to kind of like spread this out a bit, and maybe we'll make these even thinner. So let's go with like 1. And let's see if we can rotate them. Right? You can see you really just kind of begin to play with a lot of stuff in here. Right? I might pull this back a little bit. Cool. It's somewhat interesting. Something's going on here. You can make another additional spline in here as well. And then I really kind of needed to make a stronger focus point. So what I ended up doing, I ended up taking a basic sphere. I might have turned it into like an icosahedron and just dropped the segments down a little bit, maybe deleted that fog tag. You're not going to see it a whole lot inside there anyway. And I threw a diffuse material on it. Let's throw that in here. And in this diffuse material, I did a black body emission. And let's start messing with some of the camera settings. Again, if you know kind of my workflow, I'll try to lean on more of the design throughout the piece. So let's kind of give this a little bit more of a bloom. Let's kind of increase a glare a bit. Might want to start to begin to kind of mess with the cutoff as well, because really I want the glare to be coming from this element down here. I'm fine with a couple additional elements though also. I did jack up some of the spectral intensity. I turned that ray count down a little bit. You know, this is where you can kind of begin to mess with some of the angles of some of this stuff as well. Mess with that, where that spectral glow is in fact coming from. went into this material, I did crank up some dispersion to get some more interesting colors coming through that glass, some kind of really interesting kind of rainbow prism look. And then let's hop back into the camera. In the aperture, I really like seeing a strong aperture edge, as well as turning down some of that roundness. And I threw in some additional spheres. Let's turn this way down, because I know that I made some pretty small spheres in here that I then put in with a cloner object. And we can say render instance, and I just kind of scattered these all over the place. Let's see. And I think I put that same material on this as well. Let's bring this back to 200. I am going to throw a random effector on this also. Bring a radius to 2. I might make another diffuse material, right? Something that's not as intense. Probably just go right into the emission, say surface brightness, throw that on that sphere. Now you can see now they're kind of a lot smaller. Now we'll add another random effector, and you can see I'm not actually labeling anything, which is not typical of like my workflow. However, for an instance like this, when I was doing this live, and you know, I had, like I said, 20 minutes or something like that to do it from beginning to end and come up with like the concept and work this through. I didn't have a whole lot of time of naming stuff. That wasn't an option. Now I did save when I was there, which I'm not actually doing right now, but you know, I think that's okay for this purpose. All right, so yeah, as we're kind of like getting this, it's starting to come together. I mean, this is where then fine little tweaks started to come in and come into play, and also deciding like, hey, should we come in here and like, should we like begin to crop some of this stuff? Let's see if I can get that focus back in here. You know, like what looks better? You know, something that's a little bit more zoomed out, something that is closer in. Like this all comes into, you know, kind of your kind of own personal thing. You know, I also like adding some kind of distortion. So like this will kind of warp it. Not really going to be super noticeable unless, you know, you're here while you're kind of doing it. And then what I did was I basically took the same cloner, and I can remove that random. And I said I wanted this to clone onto an object. And the object I wanted it to clone to was this spline. It's creating that flower here. And I wanted to create it so it was in kind of even distribution. And maybe actually I went to the cloner on that. Let's see if that works instead. Yeah, there we go. So now it's actually on the flower itself, right? And this was giving some really cool, interesting additional points. If I change the spline path here, because you can see there's kind of a really big gap distance where the points are, maybe just something like natural. That's not change the intermediate points. And I'm afraid that if I were to change this from Bezier to something different, let's say uniform. There we go. Now we're getting a few more points in there. That's what I want. Cool. And then for this, clearly we can increase how many that we want on here. I can throw possibly like another random effector onto this. And with this random effector, obviously rotation is not going to mean anything. I don't really want the position. I mean, if we did position, maybe like slight position, just to kind of give a little variety here. And then scale, maybe negative 0.25, just something to kind of give each one of those slightly something different. I don't know, maybe a little bit more variety in randomization of position could look kind of cool. Yeah, something like that's pretty interesting. And then I did like getting some of those, like, see these little like star glints that are going around. I'm just gonna copy and paste this and maybe have these not go so far scattered all over the place. Try to bring them back in just a little bit more. I think this has a lot to do with the random effector I put on it. And so I'm going to do less of a random effector. Let's kind of move this up a bit. I will space these out, but I do want them to kind of be mostly centered around the flower itself. So let's say same thing with this, like 130. Now let's throw one more random effector onto it. Maybe mess with the parameter so they are beginning to get randomized in position. Clearly, I feel like there's way too much little like dusty stuff coming across my screen right now. So let's reduce the overall amount by like half. And maybe even the overall size, make these just a little bit like smaller, tiny glints. I think something like that is pretty good. I might add just a little bit more in though. Let's see, just tweaking that setting. So this is it. This is pretty much where I was able to get to while we were doing that. And you know, when you got to come up with something quick on the spot, I think something like this was really good. I think we could do kind of like, I'm at 15 minutes right now. So boom, this is pretty much enough time to render. Obviously, my whole goal was to be like, hey, how do you come up with an idea super, super quick with no other additional assets? If you remember, I did mention it helps to be able to play with kind of a variety of different HDRIs and stuff like that. And you can see as I switch through them, I liked some HDRIs that had and offered maybe a little bit more contrast to them, that didn't, you know, capture as much white reflection onto the glass itself. You know, I think any of these are you know, acting fairly cool, fairly interesting, are going to give us some really cool glass looks. I might just really quick need to come to the post-processing here, maybe mess with that cutoff. I might even mess with some glare blur. Starting to get pretty heavy on that glare. Maybe increase some of the bloom here. Maybe take some of that cutoff off again. Right, so like this is starting to look fairly interesting to me. Let's keep going with that bloom. Maybe increase that glare as well. I'll probably switch to HDRI. Like I'm at 17 minutes. Let's see here if I can find something. Maybe bringing back some more of that white reflection could help. This is why I love the HDRI link that brings me to all these various assets. I feel like, you know, one of these we're definitely gonna land on here. And I can always go in, if I get it a little bit brighter, I'm not that worried about it, because I can always mess with the exposure and kind of gamma overall. So let me just get one here that I like. This one's pretty cool. I think I'm going to stick with this one. Let's go into our camera imager. I didn't mess with any of this yet. Let's bring that gamma down so we can get a little bit more contrast. Maybe slightly bring this up. Maybe crunch in some of that overexposed area. And here we go. That's it. That's how I was able to create my image live on stage at the Digital Art Deathmatch. And once again, you know, come in here, you can still tweak some stuff, maybe give some additional variety here in height, maybe some more variation in the rotation of those pieces, and you get a little bit more organic. Perfect. 18 minutes. That's just enough time to render this one and call it. Sweet.